Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating source text titled The Architecture of Intent, the Science of Spells. Now, before you roll your eyes and think we're diving into fairy tales, consider this for a second. What if you are already using practical, energetic engineering every single time you stress over a presentation or desperately hope for a specific outcome? The source material we're looking at today completely reframes magic. It's not some forgotten superstition. It's a highly structured mechanism. So if you've ever thought of a spell as just, waving a piece of wood in the air, prepare to have your perspective totally shifted. Let's get right into it. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look beyond the magic wand. Then we'll break down the mechanics of intention, followed by the science of belief. After that, we'll explore your unconscious magic, and finally wrap up with choosing the pattern intentionally. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Beyond the Magic Wand, moving from fantasy to focus. The source text immediately dismantles centuries of superstition, and it sets up a completely new foundation for what a spell actually is. Look, for centuries, pop culture has trapped the idea of spells in the realm of absolute fantasy. We're talking fairy tales, wooden wands, dusty old grimoires, theatrical magic, the whole shebang. But the reality presented in the text, it's entirely different. It defines a spell as focused intention, directing consciousness, and structuring energy. The author argues that you aren't just summoning something out of thin air. Instead, you're engaging in a sophisticated method of programming the invisible architecture of existence. Imagine the universe as this vast field of potential data. When you cast a spell, you're essentially writing code. You're deliberately organizing your thoughts, your physical state, and your focus into one coherent signal to program that field. It's a massive shift from passive wishing to active, structured focus. Moving right along to Section 2, the mechanics of intention, or how we actually engineer that intention. So if a spell is basically a program, how exactly do we write the code? Well, ancient magicians engineered reality using a very specific set of mechanics, and it starts with words. Language carries vibration. The text notes that spoken words aren't just empty sounds. They are literal patterns of intention given a physical frequency to impress upon reality. But words alone, not going to cut it. That brings us to the second element, emotion. Think of emotion as your fuel and your amplifier. The source material draws a brilliant parallel here. It says, a spell spoken without emotion is like a car without an engine. I mean, it looks the part, but it's absolutely not going anywhere. But you add certainty, intense desire, or profound gratitude, suddenly you've got a full tank of gas, and that energetic imprint is amplified exponentially. Finally, we have symbols. Candles, sigils, specific colors. The text argues these were never just random, spooky decorations. They're highly calculated anchors for concentration. They give your conscious and subconscious mind a unified focal point, aligning all of your scattered internal energy around one singular purpose. When you put all those mechanics together, it leads us to this really profound observation from the source. A ritual creates repetition, and repetition creates power. The text points out that this is exactly why rituals have existed across literally every human civilization in history. They aren't just empty, mindless habits. They act as a highly effective form of psychological and energetic engineering. Think about your physical brain for a second. Repeated focus literally carves out new neural pathways. By repeating the words, physically feeling the emotion, and focusing on the symbols, you are grounding mysticism into biological reality. You are creating tangible, measurable power through that sustained, repeated focus. Which brings us to Section 3, the science of belief, acting as the bridge to modernity. Now, this is where it gets incredibly fascinating. These ancient concepts bridge directly over to our modern scientific understanding. The source text makes a super compelling case that modern science is literally just beginning to touch the edges of what ancient traditions practiced as daily reality for millennia. I mean, when we look at phenomena like the observer effect in quantum physics, where just the act of observing alters the behavior of particles, or neuroplasticity, which proves that our sustained thoughts can physically rewire our brain structure, we start to see massive hints of a much larger truth. Even mind-body medicine shows us that our mental state directly alters our physical chemistry. Ancient practitioners didn't treat this connection as some interesting theory to debate in a lab. They treated it as a totally actionable practice. Take the placebo effect, for example. In everyday conversation, we usually use that word to mean something fake or tricked, right? But look at the actual mechanism. A placebo is a process where pure belief fundamentally alters physical results. It does not mean fake. The author explains that a spell is essentially a deliberate placebo for reality. When someone in a medical trial takes a sugar pill and their body physically heals, well, it's obviously not the sugar that cured them. It's the incredible biological power of their own focused expectation. Modern medical science relies heavily on accounting for this expectation because it's just so incredibly powerful. True belief literally alters physical reality, and the text argues that this is the exact same mechanism an intentional spell leverages. Okay, let's make this super personal in section 4, your unconscious magic, or the magic you're already doing. Let's bring this right into your daily life, because according to the source, most of us are already casting spells all day long without even knowing it. I really want you to let this quote from the text sink in. Every repeated complaint is an incantation of limitation. Think back to the mechanics we just talked about. Words, emotion, and repetition. Every time you walk into a meeting and emotionally tell yourself, man, I am terrible at public speaking, this is going to be a disaster, you aren't just venting, you're actually structuring your energy for failure. Every fear you mentally rehearse daily, every single time you emotionally complain about a situation, you're effectively performing a ritual of resistance. You are working as an unconscious magician against your own goals, shaping your expectation until it inevitably manifests in your physical reality. Crazy, right? So how do we fix that? That brings us to section 5, choosing the pattern intentionally, stepping into conscious magic. This is where we make that critical shift from unconscious limitation to conscious power. What does conscious magic actually look like in practice? The source outlines some very clear examples. If your intention is protection, the spell isn't about conjuring up some invisible, mystical shield. Rather, it's the focused, deliberate cultivation of certainty and safety within yourself. If your intention is prosperity, it's about maintaining a sustained alignment with abundance. That means acting, thinking, and making decisions from a place of having enough rather than lacking. And for healing, it's your internal belief actively reinforced by symbolic, physical action. The biggest takeaway from the author here is that the universe responds to consistency. It acts like a mirror, reflecting back whatever emotional and mental pattern is repeatedly fed and sustained over time.
And here is a massive misconception. We often think of magic as this high drama, one elaborate, desperate performance, maybe a huge ritual done in a moment of panic, but entirely underpinned by doubt. But the text argues for discipline instead, a quiet, daily ritual practiced with absolute, unwavering faith. Because the universe, according to the source, does not distinguish between your conscious goals and your unconscious habits. It only reads the dominant signal. So the quiet, disciplined daily repetition of an intention is infinitely more powerful than an occasional dramatic outburst fueled by anxiety.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought drawn directly from the text. The true science behind spells isn't supernatural at all. It is simply the interaction of your mind, your energy, your symbolism, and your focused will. Since you are already casting spells with every single thought, spoken word, and deeply held expectation, the question isn't really whether magic is real. The only question left is, are you using it consciously?